it. That's so awesome.
So great. Okay. Are you should be?
Okay.
Hey.
Yeah, I don't even have a
Everyone?
mask.
Hello?
Should we
Hello.
ask for the. Okay.
It's friends, whatever people want.
Okay.
Mask.
Okay. How's your morning?
I feel so much better.
Do you?
So, like,
Did you sleep well?
yeah.
Oh, thank you.
No, I have nothing. Like, it's gone.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was
Is this on?
You can just
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Melissa Regalado, and I will be the forum host for today's conversation. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides internships, an array of transformative experiences for students through these internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Today's forum is a conversation with leaders of the Utah Period Project, working to end period poverty in our lifetime. The Utah Period Project's goal is to increase the ability of women, girls, and all who menstruate to live fully without interruption in necessary activities like school and work, by increasing access to free and safe period products. We have an exciting panel joining us today, starting with Emily Bell McCormick, who is the founder and president of the Policy Project, a nonprofit organization that works to strengthen communities by implementing healthy policy. Emily is an expert in enacting effective change through legislation and policy efforts, as well as through educating the public and creating social movement. Emily also works as a KSL 5 Smarter Series editor. Next is Kristen Anders, who is a community champion for women, children, and refugees across Utah. Kristen is a doer and communications expert who recently launched the #SistersGood social media campaign, which has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to provide period products to the Utah Food Bank. And next is Cheryl Ellsworth, who worked as a public school teacher in Philadelphia, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. before coming to work for the Utah State Board of Education as the Family and Community Engagement Specialist. Now she is the project manager for the Utah Youth Leadership Pipeline, where she works to increase representation of BIPOC youth in education, business, and politics. Next, we have Muskan Walia, who is a senator in the University of Utah Student Government. Muskan has been working to improve access to period products on campus. And we also have Elnaz Tamasabi, who is a senior studying international studies and health society and policy. Elnaz is the director of the Student Resources Board in ASUU. She is currently working on providing reusable period products to students on campus. And finally, our moderator is Mary Catherine Perry, who began her career in politics with her own Washington, D.C. internship, and then following completion of her master's degree, she worked for the Utah legislature in the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. As a parent of 4, she has been deeply involved in public education and now works as the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for the Policy Project. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Okay, I think I'm on. I am your moderator, Mary Catherine Perry. We are so glad to be here today. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about the issue of period poverty here at the University of Utah, and we're so grateful for the Hinckley Institute of Politics that you've agreed to host this event. I reached out to the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics, Jason Perry, from across the dinner table, and asked him if they would consider hosting an event where we could talk about this and bring a greater awareness to the public about it. And of course, he agreed and said, name your date. So we appreciate that. And it really does we talk about this elevating this conversation, bringing it to a university where you've already done work in this area too. And we will have some questions at the end. I know that we have people watching online too, and so you can submit those questions as well. So we'll do a little bit of that at the end too. I'm just going to begin, first of all, by talking a little bit about our bill, just because that's my area of specialty. We have House Bill 162, period products in schools, and that is sponsored by Representative Lisenby in the House, Utah House. We had our first public hearing yesterday. It was amazing in the House Education Committee, where it was passed out favorably. Not just passed out, but unanimously passed out favorably. So we're really excited. Now it will go to the full House of Representatives for its vote. Both Kristen and Emily testified. Kristen brought a 16-year-old student who has struggled with period poverty to come and testify before the committee, but they were compelling public comment, and the entire Education Committee was fully supportive. So we were so excited to have that first win in the Utah legislature. Let's start with our panelists, and we want to give you, just take a few minutes and describe how you became involved either with the Utah Period Project or with increasing awareness for period poverty at the university for our students. But if you'd each just take a couple minutes and talk about that, that would be great. Why don't you start?
So I'm the director of the Student Resources Board in ASUU. My job is basically to evaluate needs that are not met on campus and then to provide them to students. And one of the needs that I noticed, as well as what my board has noticed, is that there is a need for hygiene products, specifically period products. And we realized that period products are very, very costly. When you use them, they are one-time use, and then you have to throw them away. And if you add that up, it's quite a bit of money that is spent every year to purchase these products. Of course, there are reusable products that you can purchase and that are more sustainable. However, those tend to be more costly. And so we decided, since we do have a bit of a budget to work with, to purchase these products for students and to distribute them across campus. We are currently in the process of doing that. However, we have noticed that this will help a lot to ease the financial burden that hygiene products have on students, especially when you take into consideration all of the other costs they have, such as tuition, housing, food, anything like that. So we are currently working on that, and hopefully we will be giving those out sometime in the next few months, but that's really what we noticed the most, and so that's how we got involved in helping out with the period project and students who are facing uncertainties around having periods.
That's great, Elnaz. I'm Muskan. I am the student senator and treasurer from ASUU. I got, into this area of advocacy in high school, actually. So I feel like, where I come from, or where, where I grew up, periods are a very taboo topic, and so I worked with Days for Girls, and I collaborated with them and my local chapter in my district and my high school, and had them kind of run a volunteer project with a bunch of students at our school to just kind of like bring down that barrier of having that conversation, and also help students in our local area understand period poverty and the communities that are facing period poverty, within our the United States and globally as well. So when I got on campus and had the position of senator, I was kind of looking at ways that I can be an advocate on campus for different communities. And so back in May, I was talking to my legislative advisor and past senators just on, things that are really pressing on campus, because I'm a second year, and so I wasn't really familiar. And we thought of this idea and the history of, there was a bill that was presented, but then COVID started, and so it got shut down because we didn't have the funding for it. And so I kind of took that and had to navigate, different stakeholders on campus to present this project to and see if it was something feasible that was in the capabilities of facilities departments and ASUU, et cetera. And we've been working since May, and we're really excited to increase the access of period products on all restrooms on campus by July. So that's we're trying to finish up the funding aspect and get facilities okay with it, and send out a student survey to make sure that dispensers are okay and it's accessible and inclusive. And so it's really exciting.
Okay, well, I think I might. I'm so excited to be here, and my name is Emily Bell McCormick. I'm the founder of the Policy Project, and I look at these young college students, and I'm like, oh, if the future is in their hands, we're gonna get this done. So thanks for the work you guys are both doing. I had a similar genesis story with Ms. Scon. I have a good friend who works for the global organization Days for Girls, and she was living in South Africa at the time, working on menstruation issues in low-income countries in Africa. And she was, we went to breakfast, she was in town visiting. We went to breakfast and started talking about what are the issues with menstruation. And to be totally frank, this was about 4 years ago. I really had no idea that they were as dramatic as they were. Especially in these very low income countries, there was a big stigma around it, so much so that it was really affecting girls' education and ability to progress, right? So it was an enormous barrier to opportunity for them. Things like if they attended school and they were sitting on a bench and didn't have any type of product, they would get in trouble with their teacher, right? Or there would be sexual transactions in order to get product. There was a lot of crazy, really sad stuff going on. So in our conversation, we talked about what that looks like in those countries, and I started wondering what it looked like in the United States. So we chatted about it. Neither of us had any idea, and so we started looking at what policy efforts were looking like here in the U.S. And we thought for sure everything would be done the U.S. is so awesome. I'm sure there's not going to be a problem. And we looked at it at a federal level, and what we saw was that the IRS, the way that they codify things, they decide what products are taxed and what isn't, and what things you can buy with a health savings account, all of these things that you guys know probably pretty well as students. And we saw that a lot of products fell into this bucket of being tax-free because they were medically necessary. So those are things like any type of prescription drug. There are also things like Band-Aids, sunscreen, Rogaine, Viagra, some men's products like that. Were tax-free, but the one big hole was menstrual products. Those were incurring tax. And so we worked a little bit on that, but really started to focus on the state. I will just give you an update. In 2020 with the stimulus package, the IRS recategorized those, and so now menstrual products are tax-free, purchasable with an HSA and stuff, which is cool. So we started looking at Utah. I'm a native of Utah, and looking at what we had going on here, and saw that they're the same issues on a micro level in the state of Utah. So menstrual products are incurring sales tax, where other products that are kind of health-based or medically necessary are not. So we worked on the tampon tax a couple years ago. It passed and then was overturned because it was attached to a big tax reform, and so that's a really long story. It was overturned, but we kind of refocused about a year ago and said, listen, we're struggling to get the tampon tax passed in Utah. So what can we do that would maybe even have a bigger impact, right, with menstruation? And as we started looking at it, it became really clear that the most impactful thing immediately would be to have a statewide mandate or a policy that said that every public school and charter school needed to provide period products for their students. And so we have been working with the Utah legislature, and Mary Catherine gave you the update on the bill, that HB 162, which would put period products into every public school and every charter school in the state. And we just see that the impact of that is going to be enormous. I think we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's exciting.
Perfect. Thanks, Kristen.
Okay. Hi, guys. How is everybody? You having a good day? This. My kids are always like, good day. And I'm like, they're like, eh, then they give me the reality with the thumb. Okay, well, good. Well, thank you for having us. I'm Kristen Andrus. How are you? Good. So grateful to be here and to talk to you guys. I went to University of Utah against my husband's every wish, who didn't know me at the time. He is, oh, there's Cheryl. Come in. I'm not a native of Utah, but I have fallen in love with Utah, and I'm so grateful to be here. I'm especially grateful to be here because we get to make big waves in a state like this. Like, there's not a lot of groups we're kind of stay-at-home moms, and we've been able to do really huge, impactful things, which I think is really cool in a state like this, and then is going to really pave the way for other states. So how I got involved is I've been neighbors and friends with Emily for a long time. We both kind of had twins and went through hell and back together. And I knew she was working on the tampon tax, but at the time, and I've always told her, like, I love philanthropy and I love charity work, and my family has a foundation and it's exciting, but I'm like, I will never do policy. So you'll never see me walking the halls except for when Emily and Mary Catherine bring me in here. But what I've realized is it always ends back at policy. Like, if I want to make change as a philanthropist, as someone out doing good in the community, it's going to come back, like, which is kind of upsetting to me, but it's the truth. And so I'll probably be here more than I want. But I knew what Emily was doing, and I was at a middle school in Murray. Does anyone know where Murray is? It's like a couple of miles from my house. And a social worker, who are the most important people in all of the schools because they have a tap and they know exactly what's going on with all of their kids. We were working on frozen turkeys and Thanksgiving meals, and under her breath, she said, this is great, jackets are great, and canned goods are great, but what we really need are pads and tampons for our girls. And what I forget to tell with that story is the next words out of her mouth were, our teachers cannot afford to keep giving these to the girls. And as we were testifying yesterday, teachers came up and said, I'm a teacher, my husband's a teacher, we spend so much of our income on pads and tampons. But those words these are just the things we're hearing constantly from teachers. And so I said, really, is that true? And I knew she was working on the tampon tax, so I went, where do you go when you have like something exciting and you're thought-provoking? You go online, right? You go on Instagram or Snapchat, and I'm like, okay, so if this is a thing, let's try to raise some money. And I thought maybe we'll raise like, a little bit of money. I have about 100,000 followers online, so there's a decent amount if everybody gives $5. Well, in a matter of weeks, it was Galentine's last year, so we did a little Galentine's give. Instead of buying chocolates for your girlfriend or whatever, give $5 and let's raise some money for period products. And everyone was just like no one had thought about period products. And so we equated, if you don't have money for food, and we know from billboards from the Utah Food Bank that our kids do not have enough money for food. That is just known in our state. But what we never talk about is the silent need that if they're in the free lunch line, they definitely do not have pads and tampons at home, and definitely not at school. So we raised $60,000 in a matter of weeks, $5 at a time. And I got my friends together, and we got in our Suburbans, and we traversed the state, and we dropped off Suburban trunk loads of pads and tampons to over 50 schools. And we learned so much doing that. At every school, there were tears. At every school, there were principals and social workers and people saying, no one has ever walked through our door with period products. And the stories come out. And it's something that they're like, we never thought about it because no one asked, because it's still this like shameful experience, which is so sad. So my husband, who runs Traeger Grills, was like, Kristen, this is not sustainable. Like, you and your girlfriends out going school to school in your Suburbans is not gonna last. So I partnered with the Utah Food Bank with something called Sister Goods. And so how they deliver things and their 200 pantries and all of their supply chain works really well. Not to mention we buy pads and tampons through them at a very, very, very reduced rate. And so we're able to help so many women and girls across the state. And it was just this really cool aha moment for me, literally in the back of a pickup truck with holding a frozen turkey, that this is a problem. And to watch where it's gone with Emily and with, it's just been this movement. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit too, but it has been the coolest thing to be a part of. I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose because I don't know what I'm doing. And even as I was driving the students up to the Capitol last night, I was explaining everything. And then I looked back and I said, you guys, I'm just making this up. Like, I actually have no idea what I'm doing, but let's just see what happens when we get there. So that's what I feel like I'm doing every day, but having so much fun doing it.
Thank you, Kristen. And Cheryl, welcome to, we're just taking a few minutes and talking about how we became involved in the Utah period movement, kind of whether the students or with the period project. If you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes and talking about your connection with
Sure.
that.
My name's Cheryl Ellsworth. Nice to see you all. I am a former school teacher. So I worked in Philly, Maryland, and DC public schools. And I never really thought I was going to be a teacher, but different things happened in college that helped me to realize that I really had a passion for education. And so I decided to finish my degree and do a program called Teach for America, which places graduates in like really high needs areas. Philly was high needs, Maryland was high needs, but DC is really high needs. And so I taught at the lowest performing elementary school in the District of Columbia. We were number 71 of 72 public schools, but we ended up being the first school to get out of priority status. And so there was a lot of attention around what was happening at Stanton Elementary School, a school that for years, for generations had been failing. And one thing that we recognize is that, yes, it's great to have great pedagogy and be a really awesome teacher, but you need a really great school leader. You need systems in place for a school to be safe. You need curriculum alignment. You need all of these things, but we also had a lot of services for our kids. We lived in a food desert, and I mean, there were like 5 fried chicken places around, which is great, but it's not sustainable for a healthy body. And so we had fresh fruits and vegetables delivered weekly. Unfortunately, a lot of my kids had parents that were incarcerated, so we provided services for our kids. And we recognized that there's so much that kids are going through that we don't recognize. We just want kids to come and learn and do better and do their best. But when they have a lot of external things coming hard on them, it's really hard to learn. And it was then that I recognized when a very simple fact, if kids are not in school, they're not learning. And for those of you who don't know, black children or black girls do menstruate earlier than white children or other children of color. And so we had kids as early as like 4th grade not in school because of issues around period products. So this is something very separate to then moving to Utah, working at the State Board of Education. Emily and I knew each other. She lived in Northern Virginia, and I was a DC public schools teacher, so I knew her years ago. And I'd been watching some of the work that she was doing, and she was watching some of the work that I was doing at the State Board of Education, and recognized that my work was not just here in the Salt Lake region. I go to the rural and remote Navajo reservations down in San Juan, to very remote and rural areas, to Tremont and box elders. So in my job, I was going all around the state and recognizing that we have 300 plus schools that are Title I schools. These are schools that receive public funding because a certain amount of kids have free and reduced lunches. We also recognize that made up 27% of our state are Title I schools. And so when we're looking at this number and we're looking at the demographics of the kids that affects, these are generally students of color. And not only are these students that have, food needs, they need period products as well. And so I just don't see, in the education world, I recognize we cannot go like, you focus on this or this or this. It's an and for kids to be successful. So I was really happy to be invited here today and just talk about my perspective as a former educator and a specialist at the State Board of Education.
Thank you, Cheryl. We appreciate you sharing that, and thank you to all of the panelists. Emily, I want you to talk just a little bit more specifically about period poverty in Utah. Like, what kind of impact is that having? And Emily mentioned too that the bill that we were talking about specifically is targeting K through 12, the elementary school children, but it's a global issue, it's a Utah issue, it affects everyone at every level. But will you talk a little bit more specifically about period poverty in Utah?
Yeah, so period poverty, when we say those words together, it just means a lack of access to period products. So if you struggle to afford them, if your parents can't afford them for you, because as we established, as Cheryl just talked about, menstruation starts really young. You know, we see that 15% of girls are starting, and menstruators start puberty at age 7, which means they're menstruating within a year or two of that. It's really, really young. And if you are low income or have experienced like childhood trauma or something like that, that number is more like 38% of those girls are starting at 7. If you have seen a 7-year-old, I have one, they're just little bodies. There's no way that they, you know, that's a tough thing to manage at that age. So we know that menstruation happens, 90% of menstruators have started at age 13. So almost everybody has, and that's before the legal age to work, right? So if you were born into a household where, you know, you have parents who are able to care for you and afford your needs, that might be taken care of. But what we're seeing is in the United States, it's a massive problem. We know that about 70% of girls and menstruators have either missed class or they know somebody who's missed class because of a lack of access to period products. So you think of that, like 7 out of 10, that's a lot more people than we might imagine. We know that 1 in 4 teens cannot afford period products at all. So just never. Every single month for 3 to 5 days when they are menstruating, they can't afford product. That is like an enormous amount of stress, and teenagehood, as we all know, is really stressful anyway. We know that half of the women, it's about 46% of women in poverty, on the monthly are having to choose between period products and a meal. And you know, as we've been going around the state talking about this issue with a lot of different, like anyone who will listen, we have really started hearing a lot of stories, you know, what that looks like at a personal level. And at a personal level, it looks like there was a woman named Sarah who grew up in Salt Lake City School District, and she had a little sister. Her parents had addiction issues, and so they weren't able to fully care for them. And so 3 to 5 days a month, she and her sister would just lay out rags on a couch and sit and watch TV. You know, or there was another young woman named Mia from Granite School District, and she was a recent immigrant. Her parents also could not afford period products, so they used cotton balls instead, and they stopped going to school because cotton balls are less expensive, but they're not secure. So when they're walking down the hall, they're falling out of their pants, and that's just like mortifying for a girl, you know. So I think period poverty is something that's really, it's so much more widespread than we would have guessed, even here in the United States. And so to provide these, you know, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but our hope is that like no girl should have to leave school, no menstruator should have to leave school because they're bleeding, right? It is just generally accepted in our culture and in our policy and the way that we do things that toilet paper and hand soap, right? That's OSHA. They say that you have to have these things in a bathroom for it to be a bathroom. And what we're saying is that menstruation, it can't be held. Like number 1 and number 2, if you need to go number 1 or number 2, you can kind of hold the weight until we're done with this. But you cannot hold menstruation. When it starts, it's more like a bloody nose. You got to take care of it right then. So for these like little kids who can't manage that well, that's where we're trying to intervene and like stop period poverty at that level.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. And Emily has been working on this for years and years, so we appreciate her work in that area. Something Kristen doesn't lead with, though, is in her community work, is one of the reasons why this bill has been so successful is that we've been able to have donations from 2 major donors to purchase the dispensers that are going to go in these elementary schools. One was the Larry and Gail Miller Family Foundation. The other is the Andrus Family Foundation. They each pledged $1 million to purchase the donations. And then we're asking the legislature to appropriate the money to pay for the products that will go in the dispenser. When they heard about the private donors, they were like, boom, this is just got easier for us. And so we appreciate not just boots on the ground, but also the donations. So Kristen, will you talk just a little bit about the importance of that? And then also kind of how you've been able to use your community outreach in your sphere, which is 100,000 followers. We don't all have 100,000 followers, but kind of like what we can do in a similar, but maybe smaller scale.
Yes, and thank you. Yeah, we were really excited to be able to do that donation and have the ability to do it, and we felt like it was kind of I have 4 daughters, followed by identical twin boys who tear our lives apart. So it was fun to know that I had these 4 daughters who, and then like the story comes full circle where you guys don't know her, but 2 weeks ago, my 11-year-old calls me and says, Mom, I got my period for the first time. So I had to go pick her up. She wasn't even prepared. So like I said, I'm making this up as I go along, but she was even uncomfortable to go to the office and ask for period products. And we talk about tampons at dinner every single night. So it is interesting when it comes, you make these big checks, these big donations, but I'm like, it's so personal, and it really is on a personal level. I have people reach out to me daily and say, please talk about my GoFundMe. Please talk about this thing that I care about. Please share this. And do you know what my response is? 95% of the time, I turn it back to them and I say, you go share it. You have so much influence where you stand. The circle that surrounds you, your team, your tribe, your village, like whether that's on social media or at school or in your neighborhood or at work, the impact you have and the waves that you can make. I mean, look at these two. You guys are proof in the pudding. You can do so much. So do you know what happens? I say, I want to watch you do this. I want you to put the GoFundMe. You have 397 followers. I guarantee you can make and then share on Facebook and then have your friends share it. They come back to me and 99% of the time they say, look what I raised. I had no idea what I could do. I did not know that I had the power to raise $5,000, $10,000, whatever, $1,000 that they were trying to raise. But you have so much influence in your sphere of whatever you're doing in your life. So remember that. Make things fun. If we sat, and kind of we're serious about it and downtrodden, and we are sometimes, and you need to be, but talking about flipping things upside down on their head, whether you're talking about saving the whales or whatever it is that you care about, make it fun, make it splashy, talk to everybody about it. I love when I serve with friends and, we're working at a Roots Charter High School and I'm like, kids. And then my friend comes in, no, teachers. Like I'm looking and they have all of these ideas that I would never think about. So when you have a team around you, they'll come up with fun ideas. As I look at what we've done as a period project, we have made waves about periods in Utah. Like who would have ever heard of such a thing? Like you would never think party, period, like major social engagement. Like never, right? But talking about issues, making it interesting, making it fun, inviting friends to come along, trying to raise money or awareness or whatever in your sphere. Don't ever feel like you're not big enough or have enough followers. Because honestly, you guys, I'll tell you, the more followers you have, far less influence. I am far less influential than I was with 10,000 followers, for sure, hands down. But I'm also a total party. Like I like to go have fun and then I invite people along and then I have them go do it. Over Christmas, we did a lot of stuff with period poverty and I said, hey, you're in charge of this middle school. You're in charge of this elementary school. And these women became ambassadors and they took ownership over these programs. I can't do it all myself. We can't spread this around the state by yourself. But you can have people that buy into what you're doing and then you put them in charge, they take ownership and they run with it. Like that is the only way that this is gonna happen. Find people that care about the same things that you care about, find them online, find them in real life, and just start talking about it. Make it fun, make it enticing, and if it doesn't work, pivot and do something else, right? Like there's probably things that we've done, we did something for Christmas, it was like, that didn't go great, but it doesn't matter. What's the next thing? Like I always say you have to show up. Like show up even though you have 10 followers. Show up even though you don't have friends at school. Talk about it even though ... Like just keep your feet moving, keep your mouth moving, and enjoy the ride.
Thank you, Kristen. And I agree, even if it's not a fundraiser, even if it's just talking about it, you are helping to bring and remove some of that stigma and some of those things that we talked about. And to the students, Muskan and Elnaz, maybe you can talk just for a few minutes about the early days where you were starting this work and kind of maybe the challenges, but also maybe the great surprises in trying to bring stakeholders together to begin this movement here on campus.
Yeah, I can start. Well, I just want to say, Kristen, that Elnaz and I actually connected just over email, knowing that we were working on something similar. So, and a great friendship has blossomed. So, I started it back in May, like I mentioned. And just getting out of my first year, it was very, very overwhelming in taking something that is not just a campus problem, but like a global problem. And so the early days were really just sending emails and not getting responses for several months, and just trying to talk to friends and legislative advisors and people who have been on campus who may know of people or organizations or committees that may align with my values or the project that I want to have on campus. So yeah, it was really, really hard to just months of like trying to communicate and trying to understand the landscape of the campus and the obstacles that I may face if I go through with the project. But it's also been so beautiful in connecting with these people. Specifically, the Inclusive Restroom Committee has just been like delightful. They've brought on board people that I may not have access to, like the facilities department and different students in different colleges that I am not a part of, and we've all been able to connect. And the Inclusive Restroom Committee has given me so many insights on, accessibility on campus and things that I wouldn't think of. I mean, initially when I looked at the project, I was like, hey, we just buy some dispensers and buy some products and have facilities like replace them. But there are a lot of loopholes and a lot of things that you have to consider, like getting student feedback every single process of the way and considering communities that are consistently left out of the conversation. That this committee and the students that I work with and the different people on the committee and facilities that I work with that are being very intentional every step of the way. And so, yeah, it's been over a year, but I think that's beautiful because we've been so intentional, and that when this project launches, we can be really confident that we've considered all communities. I'll say something specific, like we thought that initially that we would use the funding to put the products in female restrooms. And the students came back to me and said, what about the students that need to use male restrooms? And then I was like, hey, let's do the gender neutral bathrooms. And they were like, well, that overcrowds for students who may feel comfortable only using those restrooms. And so, we pivoted and we've tried to figure out how we can be most efficient with the funding that we have access to get it on every single bathroom so that every single student feels included in this conversation. And yeah, I mean, I've learned so many things about like maintenance stuff, and I thought we would just get a dispenser, but that's not great. And so we're looking at bins. And I'm also really grateful to be on a campus where there's a specific committee for inclusive restrooms, and they were thinking about piloting this project, and there were people before me that really laid the amazing groundwork for this, so that there weren't as many barriers for me, and that there's access for students on our campus.
That's great. For me, back in summer of 2021, I was sent an email by housing on campus saying that there is an issue, and the issue is that there are too many students for the amount of housing that has been requested. So there were a lot of students who were facing housing difficulties, and I do not have the funds to provide housing for all of them. So I figured, what is the next best thing I could do? What can I provide for them? And so I approached my advisor at ASUU with this idea of purchasing hygiene products for them. And not only purchasing hygiene products, but purchasing hygiene products that are pretty costly, honestly. And I was expecting to get shut down because I had asked for quite a large amount of money to do this. However, luckily, we are in this very interesting year of ASUU where we have more money this year than we have had any other year. And so this gave me the freedom to actually go forward with this idea. And so I had meetings with not only my advisor, but other people in ASUU who had thought of the same ideas. I met with presidency and talked through my ideas with them. And luckily, they were completely on board and had actually supported these past endeavors that Muskan was talking about that unfortunately didn't go through. And so I was very lucky to have such a great opportunity to put this forward and to have all these amazing connections who really supported me and helped me move forward with this, and who honestly were able to find me local businesses actually that did provide these period products. And so, though I wasn't able to help out students who weren't able to find housing, I have been able to help out students financially in smaller ways, and I believe that that is just as important, especially when hearing all these stories about women or people who have periods missing school because they haven't been able to purchase period products. And so, though it's been a little bit of like a roller coaster trying to figure out all the logistics to it, it has been fairly easy. And luckily, you know, there hasn't been too many hurdles to go through. So, yeah, I've been pretty lucky with that.
Thank you. I love being part of universities and living near a university because I feel like there are these amazing laboratories where we have students who are like eager to rethink a lot of like our current ways of thinking and challenge them and think creatively on how to come up with solutions. So we appreciate the work you've done here on campus. Cheryl, will you talk just a little bit about what it looks like when something as basic as like a bathroom need or a menstrual need isn't being met for these students, and kind of what you see this doing for these students, specifically in Utah, who can now have those needs met at school, how you see that helping them move forward?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is important is really normalizing this conversation, and I'm just really happy to see people in here that I believe identify as men. So I'm just like, okay, this is a really good start to people who do not have to care about this. As we know, in the past couple of years, there's been a lot of heightened racial tension. And for me, as a Black person, specifically in Utah, when I see people who stand up for racism who don't have to, that matters to me. One of the reason that I even met Kristen is she decided to have a panel at her home to basically have people talk about their experiences as Black people here in Utah. And I thought to myself, like at the time I didn't know her, but I was like, why does this like wealthy white woman really care? Like, why does she I'm like looking through her social media. I didn't know who she was at the time. I was like, her husband's not Black, her children aren't Black. Like, these are like the checking points that I'm looking for. And so first of all, the fact that some of you in here who really don't have to care about period products care is huge. Second of all, the people that you might have experiences with are those that may not have voices to speak up for themselves. And so when you are there, maybe some of you are even future educators in here, and you normalize the fact that your students can come to you, whether their gender is the same as yours, whether their race is the same as yours, whether their socioeconomic status is the same as yours or not. The fact that they feel comfortable coming to you and you like being a safe space for them allows this to not be such a shameful experience where kids are not, they're choosing to stay at home because they're so shamed by this. The third thing I want to say is I feel like we just need to be like my 2.5-year-old son who runs around my house with a tampon and saying, Mom, here's your lollipop. So I mean, like if we could just be joyful about this topic, I think this would be a better place. But I just feel like here in our state, when I'm talking to youth, I've been working on a project to increase BIPOC representation in business, politics, and education. And so I've had the opportunity to talk to 200 BIPOC youth through focus groups. And, you know, for them, they're sharing with me, like, we don't see ourselves as business leaders. We don't see ourselves in the education spaces. We don't see ourselves in politicians. We don't necessarily feel like we belong here. So when I'm looking at this room and I'm thinking like, okay, if some of these people are our future leaders and they may not racially even connect with some of the kids, but they can say like, I'm here for you. It doesn't matter if we don't come from the same background. Like I recognize like these are issues that could, one, keep you out of school, two, that are like making you feel in the margins. Like when you can be a safe space for kids, I just feel like we're gonna see a generation of kids that are gonna be more socially, emotionally, academically, whatever, prepared for the future.
Thank you, Cheryl, and we appreciate your work in public education too. It's been invaluable. We want to leave some time for questions, but Emily, I just want to conclude with you, and if you'll just take a few minutes as the founder of the Policy Project, where do you see this going next? I mean, this legislative session will end in March. You know, hopefully this specific bill will pass, and those dispensers and products will start showing up in elementary schools, but how does this fit in with the kind of your vision and your movement forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are really excited because it looks so hopeful that this bill will pass, but there are still places that have so much need. You know, we received some emails from women in the Tooele prison who couldn't afford period products. They had to purchase them at the commissary, and they were too expensive, right? They couldn't afford them. So we want to start looking at that. We want to look at homeless shelters. We're also working individually with businesses. We have this really exciting business push to become Utah Period Project approved, because I think one of these things, you guys are all here in the policy world, is paying attention to like the politics of your area and knowing what's going to resonate, right? Like a big state down on businesses mandate isn't going to work as well as having these businesses do this themselves. So asking businesses throughout the state of Utah to lift where they stand and to provide products for their employees and for their patrons. And then there are some other like statewide policy issues. We still need to get rid of that tampon tax. You know, we got a couple other things to do there, but there's a lot of work ahead.
Good, wonderful. Well, thank you all. Do we give a round of applause? Do we do Q&A? Maybe I'm looking to the experts in the room.
Take questions.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Good job, guys. That's good.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and I will bring the mic. Just because we have people watching the forum online, so we want them to hear your question.
So my question is, just because I'm not sure how this kind of works, but would there be any way for the taxes on things like Viagra and stuff like that to be implemented on those and to like take over the income that would be lost from taking them away from like tampons and stuff? Why won't they do that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's one that we've made many jokes about over the years. So they could do that. They absolutely could. We have a lot of like funny tax loopholes. Like if we're talking about why will they not just take this like tiny sales tax off of period products, right? It only saves like the average menstruator about $4 to $6 a year by not paying that sales tax. So it's not like, oh, we're gonna all be rich now, you know? It's just symbolically that it feels like that would be more equitable, right, to include those products. And you could absolutely do that. You would just have to convince them that was a good idea and get somebody to run that bill. So one of the questions that we've thought about a little bit with this work in schools, we've had mostly support. It's been an incredible issue. When there isn't support, when someone says, do you want the government, so you're telling me you want the government to pay for tampons and pads? Well, we've expected that the government will pay for the toilet paper because it's just something commonly accepted, right? And so one of the things we've said is we can either run a bill to put period products into schools or to take toilet paper out of schools. Which one do you guys want, right? So I think, you know, I understand it's not a bad idea. I just don't think legislatively it will go through. And frankly, there are a lot of men, you know, our legislature's 75% male. And so sometimes, like with this particular issue, I think it's just, there weren't enough women in the room to bring this up at the time. You know, I think a lot of it's just oversight, and we're getting there. We're trying to make up for lost time.
Representation matters.
Yeah.
I mean, at the root of it.
Yeah,
Do you think
absolutely.
one day it could like get to the point where it'd be like, okay, Viagra isn't a necessity, but all girls have their period?
Yeah, yes, this would be the beginning of that. It's a great question. I think it makes a lot of sense to probably a lot of humans in the room. But it makes a lot of sense. I think we could get there, but I think it will be more likely that we'll end up taking the tax off of menstrual products than adding a tax onto men's products. I'm just guessing by how that, I'm sure Jason could add to
your
that.
creative thinking. See,
Yeah.
that's where that
That's
starts,
good.
you know?
Very good.
Good. Thank you, guys. All right, thank you guys for being here. This has been really informative. So I substitute teach at a private school, and you mentioned that this kind of bill would be part of a public school and a charter school, and so like I actually kind of two questions. One is like, how do we get it in private schools, because there are still a lot of low-income people at private schools. And also, how do we continue like the education on menstrual products? Because I think a lot of, people have moms who can say, this is how you use a tampon, but not everyone has that.
Totally. Do you want to talk about private school, or do you want me to?
Well, I'll say when we've had these student ambassador, we've had 2 huge student ambassador events where we've had representation from over probably 70 high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, which has been so exciting. And it's kind of like the whole period poverty thing where I had all of these private schools come to me and say, but wait, what about us? We have so much need. We have so many kids on scholarship. And so what we said is for this bill, like you have to take little steps, especially with legislation, stuff like that. So with this bill, it wouldn't work, but we are definitely going to be working with these private schools. I actually have one girl who's really taken this on, I think at, was it Judge? And she is taking this on, and she's gonna have a club, and she's getting parents involved and getting donations, and to ensure that her school, it's actually a really small cost. Like when we look at the percentage of what it costs schools or the school over our school budget, I think one of the legislators, it's like 0.000001% for public schools. And so I'm hoping, my kids are at a private school, and I'm actually hoping that our school takes that on and says, this is a small cost to incur to come in line. It's kind of like becoming period project approved. And I hope that they take it on and take it seriously and do it as well on their own. I'm not sure that we'll ever come up with legislation that does that.
And then to answer your question about the education component, because that's a big one. It's a big one for girls, especially when they're starting younger and younger. A couple things with that part of the language in the bill that they're considering right now does have a little bit of an education component. And we don't know what that will look like coming out, but we're hoping that we can give some guidance in that. Interestingly, menstruation sometimes gets in the mix with sex education, which if you're a menstruator, you know that has nothing to do with sex, right? It just happens to everybody. So we'll try to start including that. We're also having discussions with like the PTA. Who is it, the PTA? This is Susie, she's also on our board. The PTA who runs the maturation programs. So trying to get into there, because another thing that we'd like to take on is the sustainability piece and working on menstrual cups and period panties, but they take a lot more education. So that is something we're trying to be very aware of and hoping that we can at least get a few things out there when we do our general distribution to the schools.
Thank you.
Hi, first I want to say thank you to all the panelists for your work in this arena, this very important arena. I'm a part of a group of MPH students who is examining this issue right now, and just did a project actually on it last semester as well. I am curious, in looking at this and doing some research in other places, for example, California, other states that have passed this and have been successful in creating these programs, in looking at the barriers to this, it seems that most of them are fiscal, but I am curious, because Utah is a special place, what other barriers have you encountered through this process in getting support for this bill? I know you said it's so far had great legislative support, but I am curious about that. And also, if you can explain a little bit more detail, I've tried to follow it and look at the funding aspect, but if anybody can provide any more insight into the funding, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Do you want to take the funding?
Yeah. Well,
she's on funding.
I can take a shot at it. So we did a lot of work about how, in research, gathering data from different sources, people who forecast for the federal government, who work in programs, private companies who provide this already in some areas for free access for students. And we kind of took their data and crunched a bunch of numbers and came up with an average cost based on Utah's public education enrollment. And then we gave that to the stakeholders, and they actually used that in their calculations for the annual cost to the state to put these products in the bill. And so we came up with, and it's difficult, right? Because this isn't being done everywhere, and not some states require it, but don't bring in the funding piece. I mean, that's why Utah, this is so amazing, is because we have the mandate, but then we have private donors, we've got an appropriation, and it's coming together. So they looked at that, and what they're planning to do at this point is use one-time money for the next couple of years to install the dispensers. They put that cost into it. And then to get the program, kind of get this started. So about $1.7 million for the next few years to get this started. And then at that point, the legislature is counting on this being normalized to the point that at that point, once the LEAs kind of figure out where the demand is going to be, because it's not going to be the same all over the state or even within a school district, that the LEAs can start to normalize the purchasing of this within their existing budgets. So just as they go to purchase soap, toilet paper, they'll add in the menstrual products, and then they will continue to restock this with their existing budgets. So it's a little bit of a one-time money, but also the legislature and the leaders have promised. They said we will review this, we will revisit, we will count on Utah State Board of Education and things to report to us and let us know how it's going. We want to know, are these dispensers empty? Because they better not be. But our donors have made it clear too.
They better not be.
They do not want to fund empty dispensers. So it is a little bit, we're kind of in that negotiation process still right now. And public education funding is huge, but there are also a lot of demands on public education, as we've seen. Schools have been expected to take on more and more and more every year. So we're finding that balance between the existing money they have, but also making sure that this is being taken care of with legislative funding.
And then just to speak to the barriers, that's a great question, because you're right to notice that there might be some here. The cultural barriers were pretty big. You know, we've been kind of like warming up the idea of menstrual policy for a few years now, you know, and it was pretty surprising to people in the beginning. They had introduced the tampon tax 4 years prior to my involvement with it. And if you go back and listen to the committee meetings, which are public, it was all male committees each year. And the word period, tampon, pad, menstruation, never even, it doesn't get spoken. And so I think just that, I mean, that was not that long ago, you know, that was not that long ago. And so I think just overcoming that barrier, and it's not just here, I mean, we just really didn't talk about menstruation in these terms until recently. So I would say there's that cultural barrier, just like, it's okay, it's also time. We're not embarrassed, you don't be embarrassed, you know, like that kind of a thing. And then I would say the other barrier to this particular kind of legislation, which is within public ed, is there are so many stakeholders. So I don't know if you have had a chance to look at, like, Hawaii tried to pass this last year, and that's a state that would be more likely to pass something like this. But the custodians actually came in at the last minute and were like, we're not doing it, you know? So when you think about like the number of people that touch those tampons and pads, and you know, you've got to get through the superintendents, all the LEAs, you have to get through the principals, you have the students, you have parents who are like, you can't tell my daughter that she has a vagina. You know, you've got like a whole lot of stakeholders in like a public ed issue like this, because it ends up touching almost every household in the state. So those were probably our biggest barriers, is like figuring that out.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
Perfect. So we are out of time for questions, but let's just give a final round of applause to our panelists for being here today.
Good job.
And thank you so much to the University of Utah and the Hinckley Institute of Politics for hosting us today. We're so glad to bring this more light to this subject. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and on your way out, there is pizza just on this table over here. So feel free to grab some, and we will see you next time.
And if you have more questions for our panelists, they have a few extra minutes too if you'd like to come talk to them as well.
Yeah, let's get a picture. Kristen, do you want to sit on that
Let's do it.
side? So we're facing blondes.
Sorry, guys. I don't have the map.
Jason, will you take it? Yeah.
We're good. Or we can sit. We look so official. Come in.
Hi, sorry, I thought it was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We're very excited this group.
Oh, it's awesome.
And, well,
I'm so glad to hear you guys are
what's
working on
interesting
it.
is so we had a course that we had to do, a systems course, and we had to